The boardroom went silent when Chandler Whitmore announced that Tristan Fairbanks would be taking over my executive position. 3 weeks. That's how long his son-in-law had been with Momentum before being handed the keys to everything I'd built. I didn't scream, I didn't argue. I simply smiled, stood up, and said, "He's all yours." What Chandler didn't know was that I'd already packed my contingency plan months ago, right around the time I pulled this company back from the edge of bankruptcy. 63 minutes after I walked out with my belongings, my phone exploded with 27 missed calls. Our biggest client, Harrington Industries, had just canceled their $18 million contract. Welcome to the Payback Office channel, where we share stories of justice served cold and karma delivered express. If you've ever been undervalued at work, replaced unfairly, or watched incompetence get rewarded while your hard work got ignored, you're in the right place. Before we dive deeper into what happened, if you believe that talent and dedication should matter more than nepotism and connections, consider subscribing. We're working toward reaching 6,000 subscribers, and having you as part of this community means we can keep sharing these stories together. No pressure, just an invitation to join others who believe hard work deserves recognition. Now, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Tessa Harlow, and until that boardroom announcement, I was the Chief Operating Officer at Momentum, a mid-sized logistics and supply chain management firm based in Denver, Colorado. I'd worked my way up from a junior analyst position over 12 years, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. My background wasn't about silver spoons or family connections. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Aurora, watching my mother manage a grocery store and my father work double shifts as an electrician. They taught me that empathy and understanding people's struggles wasn't weakness, it was the foundation of real leadership. That upbringing shaped everything about how I ran my division at Momentum. When I started at Momentum in 2011, the company was thriving under the leadership of founder Arthur Whitmore, Chandler's father. Arthur believed in merit-based promotions and fostering talent from within. He saw something in me during my first quarterly presentation, a comprehensive analysis of how we could reduce delivery times by restructuring our routing algorithms. Within 3 years, I was managing an entire regional division. Within 6, I was vice president of operations. When Arthur retired and handed the company to his son Chandler in 2019, things shifted, but not immediately. Chandler maintained most of his father's policies for the first couple of years, and I genuinely believed we could continue building Momentum into something even greater. The trouble started in early 2022. A series of bad investments in an automated warehouse system that Chandler greenlit without proper due diligence created a cascade of financial problems. He'd gone with a flashy startup vendor who promised revolutionary AI-driven inventory management, ignoring my detailed reports showing their technology wasn't ready for our scale. When the system failed catastrophically during our peak season that November, we lost 4 major accounts in 2 weeks. The financial hemorrhaging was immediate and severe. By January 2023, Momentum was staring down bankruptcy. Our creditors were circling, our stock price had tanked, and employee morale was in the basement. That's when Chandler called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually pristine appearance disheveled and stressed. "Tessa, I need you to fix this," he said bluntly. "I know the warehouse system was my call, and I know you warned me. I'm not too proud to admit I screwed up. Can you put together a recovery plan?" I could have gloated. I could have reminded him of every ignored memo, every dismissed concern, every time he'd overruled my expertise with his gut instinct. But that's not who I am. When a ship is sinking, you don't debate who steered it into the iceberg, you start bailing water. I spent the next 4 months working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. My recovery plan was comprehensive and brutal. We had to renegotiate contracts with every major vendor, restructure our debt with 3 different creditors, and completely overhaul our operational framework. I personally flew to meet with 8 of our biggest clients who were considering leaving, presenting them with detailed proposals showing exactly how we'd prevent future disruptions. I brought in my entire network of industry contacts, calling in favors I'd accumulated over a decade of professional relationships. The warehouse system disaster had cost us $14 million directly, with projected losses of another $30 million from the lost accounts. My plan needed to not just stop the bleeding, but restore confidence in Momentum's ability to deliver. The centerpiece of my strategy was landing Harrington Industries as a client. Harrington was a manufacturing giant with operations across 17 states, and they were notoriously selective about their logistics partners. Their account alone would be worth $18 million annually, but more importantly, having them as a client would signal to the entire industry that Momentum was back and trustworthy. I'd known their VP of Supply Chain, Roger Fleming, from my graduate school days at the University of Colorado. We'd stayed in touch professionally over the years, meeting occasionally at industry conferences. Getting Roger to even take a meeting required me to leverage every bit of goodwill I'd built with him. "Tessa, you're asking me to recommend partnering with a company that's been all over the trade press for catastrophic failures," he said during our first lunch meeting. I'd be putting my own reputation on the line. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I showed him exactly what went wrong, owned Momentum's mistakes completely, and then walked him through every single safeguard we were implementing to ensure it never happened again. More than that, I showed him innovations we were developing, streamlined processes I designed that would actually give Harrington better service than their current provider. It took 6 meetings, 4 site visits to our facilities, and 2 presentations to Harrington's executive board. But in April 2023, Roger called me with the news. Harrington Industries was signing with Momentum. The contract was everything I'd hoped for, $18 million annually with performance bonuses that could push it to $22 million if we hit certain efficiency targets. But the real value was the credibility. Within 2 weeks of announcing the Harrington partnership, 3 other major companies reached out to discuss bringing their business to Momentum. By June, we'd not only replaced the revenue we'd lost, but exceeded our pre-crisis numbers. The financial turnaround was remarkable. Our Q2 2023 earnings report showed Momentum had returned to profitability ahead of all projections. Our stock price recovered to within 15% of its pre-crisis peak. Creditors who'd been threatening legal action 6 months earlier were now offering us favorable terms for expansion capital. Industry publications that had written our obituary were now writing features about our dramatic comeback. Chandler was getting interview requests from business journals wanting to know how he'd orchestrated such an impressive recovery. That last part should have been my first warning sign. During a company-wide meeting in July, Chandler presented the quarterly results and talked about our vision and the leadership decisions that had stabilized the company. My name came up exactly once, in a brief acknowledgement of the operations team's hard work. I wasn't looking for a parade, but the erasure was noticeable. Several colleagues approached me afterward with confused expressions. "That was all you," my chief financial officer, Diane Patterson, said bluntly. "Everyone in this building knows you saved us." What was that performance about? I brushed it off initially. Executive politics often involved leaders taking credit for their team's work. It wasn't admirable, but it was common. What mattered was that Momentum was stable, our employees' jobs were secure, and I'd proven to myself that I could engineer a turnaround of that magnitude. That experience and those results would speak for themselves when it came time for promotions or future opportunities. I focused on maintaining our momentum, continuing to nurture the Harrington relationship, and developing the other new accounts that had come our way. Then, in late August, Chandler mentioned during an executive meeting that his daughter Sienna's husband would be joining the company. Tristan has an MBA from a solid program, and he's been exploring opportunities in logistics, Chandler said casually. "I think bringing him in at a director level in business development makes sense. Give him a chance to learn the industry, and we get someone with fresh perspectives." On the surface, it wasn't outrageous. Director positions weren't executive level, and business development was its own track, separate from operations. If Tristan actually had relevant credentials and put in the work, it could be fine. Tristan Fairbanks arrived in early September with the energy of someone who'd never been told no. He was 31, polished in that country club way, and very proud of his MBA from a perfectly respectable but unremarkable business school. His previous work experience consisted of 2 years at his father's commercial real estate firm and a brief stint at a consulting company that I later learned was also family-connected. Nothing about his background suggested any understanding of logistics, supply chain management, or the operational complexities of what Momentum actually did. His first week, Tristan scheduled meetings with every executive, ostensibly to learn the business. When we met, he spent most of the hour telling me about his ideas for disrupting the industry and thinking outside the box. His suggestions revealed a fundamental lack of understanding about how logistics actually worked. Why don't we just use an app where customers can track their shipments in real time with video feeds from the trucks? He asked earnestly. I explained that we already had robust tracking systems and that putting cameras in every vehicle would create massive privacy issues, bandwidth costs, and provide minimal actual value to clients. You're being resistant to innovation, he replied with a condescending smile. I quickly learned that Tristan had no interest in learning the business. He wanted to be recognized as a visionary without putting in the work to understand fundamentals. He'd drop into operational meetings and make suggestions that ranged from impractical to impossible, then act wounded when people explained why his ideas wouldn't work. He started going directly to Chandler with these innovative proposals. And Chandler, apparently desperate to believe his son-in-law was a genius, would sometimes override departmental decisions to implement them. One of Tristan's early wins, from his perspective, was pushing for a marketing campaign that rebranded Momentum as a tech-forward disruptor. He hired an expensive agency to create flashy materials that emphasized innovation and cutting-edge solutions. The problem was that our actual clients didn't want flashy disruption. They wanted reliable, efficient logistics that worked consistently. The campaign confused our existing customer base and attracted inquiries from startups who wanted premium service at budget prices. We wasted $200,000 on that initiative before I convinced Chandler to quietly shelve it. But Chandler's blind spot regarding Tristan was massive and growing. By October, barely a month into his tenure, Tristan was being invited to board meetings as an advisor. He'd started sitting in on client calls despite having no meaningful contribution to offer. I watched him nearly derail a negotiation with a potential client by making promises about delivery timelines that were physically impossible. I had to do damage control after the call, explaining to the client that we were still finalizing our capabilities and would get back to them with realistic timelines. The client appreciated the honesty, but the incident should have been a massive red flag about Tristan's competence. The real turning point came in mid-November during a strategic planning session. We were discussing expansion opportunities, and I presented a detailed analysis of markets where Momentum could grow based on our current capabilities and client demand. I'd identified 3 mid-sized cities where we could establish regional hubs, complete with financial projections, staffing requirements, and risk assessments. The plan was cautious but solid, 15% growth over 2 years with minimal downside risk. Tristan listened to my presentation, then stood up with his own proposal. He wanted Momentum to acquire a struggling tech startup that made delivery drones and pivot into aerial logistics. His entire plan was based on the assumption that drone delivery was about to explode, and we needed to be first movers. Never mind that drone delivery faced massive regulatory hurdles, technological limitations, and was nowhere near viable for the kind of industrial-scale logistics Momentum specialized in. Never mind that the startup he wanted to acquire was burning cash and had no clear path to profitability. Never mind that this would require diverting resources from our core business, which was finally stable again. The room went silent after his presentation. Every executive present knew it was ridiculous. Diane, the CFO, gently pointed out that the financial projections didn't account for regulatory compliance costs or the fact that the technology wasn't approved for commercial use in most jurisdictions. Our chief legal officer, Howard Kim, noted that the liability issues alone would be a nightmare. I added that our clients needed solutions now, not speculative technology that might be viable in 5 years. Chandler looked around the room, clearly torn. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. I think Tristan's showing exactly the kind of bold thinking we need. We didn't get where we are by playing it safe. I almost laughed. We'd gotten to where we were, recovering from near bankruptcy, precisely because I'd implemented careful, strategic planning after Chandler's last, bold-thinking disaster with the warehouse system. But I saw the dynamic clearly now. Chandler wasn't evaluating Tristan's ideas on merit. He was invested in Tristan being successful because having a genius son-in-law reflected well on him. We didn't acquire the drone company, but only because their asking price was too high even for Chandler's enthusiasm. The fact that it was seriously considered, though, told me everything about where things were heading. Over the next few weeks, I watched Tristan's influence grow in ways that defied any reasonable assessment of his contributions. He was being copied on strategic emails, invited to client dinners he had no business attending, and most alarmingly, Chandler started describing him as being groomed for leadership. In early December, Harrington Industries requested a quarterly review meeting to assess our performance on their account. This was standard. Roger Fleming wanted to ensure we were meeting the metrics we'd promised and discuss any adjustments for the coming year. I prepared a comprehensive presentation showing that we'd exceeded our delivery time commitments, maintained a 99.7% accuracy rate on shipments, and implemented 2 efficiency improvements that were saving Harrington money. The relationship was strong, and Roger had already hinted that they were considering expanding the contract to cover their West Coast operations, which would add another $8 million annually. 2 days before the Harrington meeting, Chandler called me into his office. Tristan was there too, which immediately set off alarm bells. "Tessa, I want Tristan to lead the Harrington review meeting," Chandler said. I must have looked as stunned as I felt because he quickly added, "You'll be there, of course, but I think it's time we started giving Tristan exposure to our major accounts. He needs to build those relationships." I chose my words carefully. "Chandler, the Harrington relationship is built on personal trust and demonstrated competence. Roger is expecting to work with me and the team that's been managing his account. Bringing in someone new to lead the meeting, especially someone who hasn't been involved in the account, could create confusion." Tristan jumped in before Chandler could respond. "I think you're being territorial, Tessa. Client relationships belong to the company, not to individuals. This sounds like you're worried about sharing credit." The accusation was so baseless and unprofessional that I actually took a breath before responding. This isn't about credit. It's about maintaining a relationship with a client who represents $18 million in annual revenue and potentially much more. Roger agreed to work with Momentum because of the specific team and approach I presented. Changing the dynamic without preparation could jeopardize that. Chandler waved his hand dismissively. "You're overthinking it. Tristan will do great, and you'll be right there to support him." It's settled. The meeting with Harrington Industries was a disaster from the opening minutes. Roger had brought his director of operations, Lisa Thornton, and their chief logistics officer, Kurt Brennan. They were expecting a detailed operational review. Instead, Tristan opened with a meandering speech about Momentum's innovation culture and disruptive approach to traditional logistics. I watched Roger's expression shift from confusion to concern. When Tristan finally turned things over to me for the actual performance review, the damage was already done. I walked through our metrics and achievements, and the numbers spoke for themselves. We delivered exactly what we'd promised and more. But Kurt Brennan asked a technical question about how we'd optimized routing for their Northeast distribution centers, and before I could answer, Tristan jumped in with an explanation that was completely wrong. He described a process we didn't use, referencing technology we didn't have, fundamentally misunderstanding how we'd actually achieved the improvements. I had to correct him in front of the client. "Actually, Tristan, that's not quite right. What we implemented was a zone-based consolidation system that—" I explained the actual process while Tristan's face reddened. Roger looked uncomfortable. Lisa was taking notes with an expression I couldn't read. The rest of the meeting was professionally awkward, with Tristan trying to insert himself into conversations where he added no value while I attempted to keep things focused on the substantive relationship. After the Harrington team left, I knew I needed to do damage control. I sent Roger a carefully worded email thanking him for the meeting and offering to schedule a follow-up call to discuss any additional questions about our operations. He responded briefly that he'd be in touch. That wasn't like him. Roger was usually warm and communicative with me. I'd seen how these things could spiral. One awkward meeting could plant seeds of doubt, and clients who had other options would start exploring them. I tried to explain this to Chandler the next day. The Harrington meeting didn't go as well as it could have. I think we need to be strategic about how we involve Tristan with established accounts versus new business opportunities where he can learn without risking existing relationships. Chandler was dismissive. Roger sent me a polite thank you email. You're being paranoid because you can't handle Tristan taking on a bigger role. I'm starting to wonder if you're threatened by having another strong leader in the organization. That accusation stung, particularly coming from someone whose company I'd personally saved from bankruptcy less than a year ago. But I maintained my professionalism. I want Momentum to succeed. That means protecting our key relationships while developing new talent. I'm happy to mentor Tristan if he's genuinely interested in learning, but that requires him to put in the work to understand our operations. The situation deteriorated through December and into January. Tristan continued to be inserted into situations he wasn't qualified for, and I continued to clean up the resulting issues. He promised a potential client delivery capabilities we couldn't meet. I had to walk it back and reset expectations. He sent an email to one of our vendors that was so poorly worded, it nearly caused a contract dispute. I had to smooth things over with a phone call and an apology. He presented a strategic proposal at a board meeting that contained factual errors about our capacity. I had to provide corrections in a follow-up memo. Each time I fixed one of Tristan's mistakes, he seemed to resent me more rather than appreciating the help or learning from the experience. He started making snide comments in meetings about old guard thinking and resistance to change. He'd go to Chandler with complaints that I was undermining him or not being a team player. And Chandler, increasingly invested in Tristan's success, started to believe it. In late January, Chandler announced a reorganization. He called it flattening the hierarchy and empowering emerging leaders. What it actually meant was that Tristan was being promoted to Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations, a newly created position that put him on the same organizational level as me. Someone who'd been with the company for less than 5 months was now my peer on the org chart, despite having accomplished exactly nothing beyond being married to the boss's daughter. The message was clear, but I still believed that competence and results would ultimately matter. I had a track record. I had relationships with our key clients. I had institutional knowledge that was irreplaceable. Surely Chandler understood that whatever his feelings about his son-in-law, the business still needed actual expertise to function. I was wrong. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning in early February. Chandler called an emergency executive meeting for 9 a.m. When we gathered in the boardroom, he looked pleased with himself in a way that made me uneasy. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about Momentum's future," he began. "We've stabilized, which is great, but stability isn't enough. We need to innovate. We need bold leadership. We need people who aren't constrained by how we've always done things." Every word felt like a setup, and I knew what was coming before he said it. That's why I've decided that Tristan will be taking over as Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately. Tessa, I want to thank you for your service to Momentum. Your contributions during our difficult period were valuable, but I think we need fresh energy in the COO role, and I'm offering you a transition to a senior advisory position where you can mentor the next generation of leaders. The room was dead silent. Diane looked horrified. Howard was staring at the table. Our VP of Client Relations, Monica Hayes, had her mouth slightly open in shock. Tristan, sitting next to his father-in-law, tried to look humble but couldn't quite hide his triumphant smile. A senior advisory position was a made-up title with no real authority, a face-saving way to push me aside while pretending it was a lateral move. Everyone in that room knew it. What Chandler was really saying was that after 12 years of building momentum, after saving the company from bankruptcy that he had caused, after bringing in the relationships and revenue that had restored our credibility, I was being replaced by someone whose only qualification was marrying into the family. I could have argued. I could have pointed out that Tristan didn't know the first thing about actually running operations. I could have reminded everyone in that room that 9 months ago we were on the verge of collapse, and it was my plan, my relationships, my work that had pulled us back. I could have made Chandler defend this decision in front of the executive team, forcing him to admit that nepotism was the only reason for it. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a bitter smile or an angry smile, it was genuine. Something had clarified in that moment. I'd been operating under the assumption that merit mattered, that results spoke for themselves, that if I just kept doing excellent work, I'd be valued appropriately. Chandler had just shown me definitively that none of that was true, at least not in his momentum. And if the game was rigged, I had no interest in playing anymore. I appreciate the offer, Chandler, I said calmly, but I don't think the advisory position is the right fit for me. I'll tender my resignation instead. Happy to make this transition as smooth as possible. I can stay through the end of the week to document processes and hand off my active projects. Chandler blinked, clearly surprised. He'd expected me to accept the demotion or maybe argue against it, but not to simply walk away. That's not necessary, Tessa. The advisory role is. I'm sure it's a fine role for someone, I interrupted gently, but it's not what I'm looking for in my career. Tristan, congratulations on the promotion. I'm sure you'll do great things. I stood up, gathered my notebook, and walked out of the boardroom before anyone could respond. Back in my office, I closed the door and took a deep breath. Then I started making a list. I'd been at Momentum long enough to know every critical process, every key relationship, every structural dependency that kept the company running. And I'd been doing this job long enough to know that most of that knowledge existed in my head and in my personal files, not in any centralized documentation that Tristan could reference. Over the next 3 days, I prepared for my departure with meticulous care. I documented the basic operational procedures in a neat binder that I left for Tristan, nothing proprietary, just the kind of standard information that any competent COO would need. What I didn't document were the hundreds of small relationship details, institutional knowledge, and informal arrangements that made everything actually work. I didn't document that Roger Fleming at Harrington Industries hated being called before 10 a.m. and preferred detailed email updates over phone calls. I didn't note that our primary shipping vendor gave us preferential pricing because I'd helped them during their own crisis 2 years ago, and that arrangement was based on a handshake deal with their CEO, not written into our contract. I didn't mention that our warehouse manager in Ohio had been covering for an inefficiency in how we'd set up the Eastern distribution system, using his own judgment to reroute shipments in ways that weren't in the official protocols. These weren't things I was obligated to document. They were the accumulated wisdom of 12 years of relationship building and problem solving. They were the difference between a company that ran smoothly and one that constantly fought fires. And they were leaving with me. On Thursday afternoon, Roger Fleming called my cell phone. "Tessa, I heard a rumor that you're leaving Momentum. Please tell me it's not true." I'd been expecting this call. Roger and I had developed a genuine professional friendship, and he deserved honesty. "It's true, Roger. I've resigned. My last day is tomorrow." There was a long pause. "Does this have anything to do with that meeting we had in December?" "With the son-in-law?" Roger asked carefully. "Partly," I admitted. "The company is moving in a different direction, and I don't think I'm the right fit for where they're headed." Another pause. "Tessa, I'm going to be straight with you. The only reason Harrington signed with Momentum was because of you. Your expertise, your reliability, your understanding of our needs. If you're not there, I'm not confident they can deliver what we need." I'd anticipated this conversation, and I'd thought carefully about how to handle it. "Roger, I appreciate that more than you know. I can't make decisions for Harrington, but I can tell you that I'm going to be taking some time to figure out my next move. If you want to stay in touch personally, I'd welcome that." What I didn't say, but what Roger clearly understood, was that if Harrington wanted to reconsider their contract with Momentum, I wasn't going to try to stop them. "We have a 30-day termination clause in our contract, right?" Roger asked. I knew he knew the answer. He was really asking me if I thought he should use it. "You do," I confirmed. Most logistics contracts have similar provisions for either party to exit without penalty as long as proper notice is given. "I'll need to discuss this with our executive team," Roger said. "But Tessa, if you land somewhere that can handle our volume and needs, I want to know about it." I meant what I said. We partnered with you, not just with momentum. We said our goodbyes, and I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of what was likely about to happen. On Friday, my last day, I arrived early to finish my final tasks. I'd sent individual emails to each member of my team, thanking them for their work and encouraging them to maintain the standards we'd built together. Many of them had already reached out privately, expressing shock at my departure and concern about working under Tristan. I couldn't tell them what to do, but I'd made it clear that I'd be happy to provide recommendations or references if anyone decided to explore other opportunities. Chandler wanted an exit interview, which was almost funny. He brought Tristan along, positioning it as a transition meeting. They sat across from me in Chandler's office, and I walked through the binder I'd prepared with basic operational information. Tristan took notes with the air of someone who thought this was all much simpler than it actually was. "Seems pretty straightforward," he commented at one point. "Most of this is just managing schedules and checking metrics." I smiled and nodded. "The fundamentals are definitely documented there. I'm sure you'll do fine." Chandler seemed almost regretful, perhaps realizing now that my departure was real and final. "Tessa, you're absolutely sure about this. The advisory position is still available if you want to reconsider." "I appreciate it, Chandler, but I'm sure this is the right move for everyone." I left Momentum's office building at 4:30 p.m. carrying a single box of personal items. My actual important files, client contact information, personal notes, project documentation, I'd already transferred to my personal cloud storage days earlier. Nothing proprietary to Momentum, but all the relationship and contextual information I'd accumulated over 12 years. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. That evening, I was home when my phone started buzzing. Text messages from former colleagues. "Did you hear? Harrington just sent a termination notice." Then another. "Monica said 2 other clients are requesting emergency meetings." Then Diane. "Chandler is losing his mind. What happened?" I'd been home for less than an hour when Chandler called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. Then a text. "Tessa, we need to talk. Harrington is canceling. Call me ASAP." Then Tristan called. Voicemail. Then Monica. "Tessa, I know you don't work here anymore, but Chandler is asking if you can come in tomorrow. Harrington sent a termination notice and he's panicking." I waited until the next morning to respond, and only to Monica, who'd always been a straight shooter. "Monica, I'm no longer an employee of Momentum. Whatever is happening with Harrington is between them and Chandler. I wish everyone the best, but I can't help." She wrote back immediately, "Understood. For what it's worth, we all know what you did for this company, and this is completely unfair." Roger Fleming's termination notice specifically mentioned that their partnership was based on the expertise of personnel who are no longer with the company. Chandler knows exactly what that means. Over the weekend, the calls continued. Chandler left increasingly desperate voicemails. "Tessa, I know you're upset, but we need you to reach out to Roger and smooth this over. Whatever salary you want, whatever title, we can work it out." Then, "Tessa, this is bigger than personal feelings. The company is at stake. Call me back." Then, "You're really going to let Momentum collapse because your pride was hurt, all those employees who depend on us." That last message almost made me laugh. I'd saved Momentum once already, working myself to exhaustion to fix problems that Chandler had created. I'd done it for those employees, for the company I'd helped build, for the relationships I valued. And Chandler had responded by handing my job to his unqualified son-in-law. Now he wanted to appeal to my sense of responsibility for the very company he'd shown me I had no real place in. On Monday morning, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "Miss Harlow, this is Amanda Kerrigan from Summit Logistics Group. I'm the CEO. I was wondering if you might have time for a conversation this week." Summit Logistics was one of Momentum's main competitors, a larger firm with national reach. I'd met Amanda briefly at industry conferences, but didn't know her well. "I'm intrigued," I said. "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where I offer you a job," Amanda said bluntly. "I've been following your career for a while, and I heard through the industry grapevine that you're no longer with Momentum." We've been looking for someone to lead our new strategic accounts division, basically building and managing relationships with our largest clients. Based on what I know about what you accomplished at Momentum, you'd be perfect. We met for coffee that afternoon. Amanda was direct and impressive, laying out a vision for Summit that was ambitious, but grounded in operational reality, exactly the opposite of Chandler's approach. The role she was offering came with a significant salary increase, equity in the company, and most importantly, actual authority to build something. "I won't lie to you," Amanda said. "Part of why I'm so interested in bringing you on is that I think some of Momentum's clients might want to follow you, particularly Harrington Industries. Roger Fleming and I play golf occasionally, and he mentioned that their partnership with Momentum was really a partnership with you." I appreciated her honesty. If I joined Summit, it would be to build something here, not to raid my former employer. But I also can't control what clients decide to do. If they reach out to me because they're unhappy with their current provider, I'm not going to refuse to talk to them. Amanda smiled. That's exactly the answer I was hoping for. Professional, ethical, but realistic. When can you start? We negotiated terms over the next few days, and by Thursday, I'd signed an offer letter to join Summit Logistics Group as Executive Vice President of Strategic Accounts. My start date was 2 weeks out, giving Summit time to announce the hire and me time to decompress from the Momentum disaster. The industry press picked up the news within days. Logistics veteran Tessa Harlow joins Summit Logistics, read the headline in Supply Chain Today. The article mentioned my background, my role in Momentum's recovery, and my new position at Summit. My phone started ringing with congratulations from colleagues and contacts across the industry. Several of them mentioned, casually, that they'd heard Momentum was having some troubles. "Heard Harrington dropped them," one contact said. "And rumor is that a couple other big accounts are reviewing their options." I didn't confirm or deny anything. I was completely out of the Momentum loop at that point, but I wasn't surprised. What I'd understood and Chandler hadn't was that in the logistics industry, relationships are everything. Clients don't partner with companies in the abstract. They partner with the specific people they trust to solve their problems. When you remove those people, especially abruptly and for obviously political reasons, you break that trust. Roger Fleming called me personally the day before I started at Summit. "Tessa, I wanted to give you a heads up. Harrington is going to be sending out an RFP for our logistics needs. Our contract with Momentum ends in 30 days, and we need a new provider. I can't show favoritism in the RFP process, but I wanted you to know it's coming and that Summit is welcome to bid." "I appreciate the heads up, Roger," I said. "Summit will definitely submit a proposal, and I can promise you that whatever we propose will be realistic, well-planned, and backed by people who actually know what they're doing." "That's all I'm asking for," Roger said. Then, more quietly, "For what it's worth, I heard what happened at Momentum, replacing you with the son-in-law. It's a damn shame. They're going to regret that decision for a long time." My first week at Summit was energizing in a way I hadn't felt in years. Amanda had assembled a strong leadership team, and they welcomed me as a genuine peer rather than a threat. The company culture was merit-based and transparent. People got promoted because they delivered results, not because of who they were related to. I started building out the strategic accounts division, recruiting talent, and developing our approach to landing and managing major clients. When Harrington's RFP came out, I led Summit's response personally. I knew exactly what Harrington needed because I'd been managing their account successfully for months. Our proposal was comprehensive, competitive, and demonstrated a level of understanding of their operations that none of the other bidders could match. We weren't the cheapest option, but we were clearly the best. 3 weeks into my tenure at Summit, Amanda walked into my office with a huge smile. "Harrington just called. We got the contract. All of it, not just what Momentum was handling, but the West Coast expansion they'd been considering. $26 million annually." I felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with professional validation. We'd won because we'd presented the best solution, built on real expertise and honest relationship building. Meanwhile, Momentum was spiraling. Without Harrington's $18 million contract, and with 2 other major accounts having left as well, They were facing a revenue shortfall of about $30 million. The financial cushion I'd built during the recovery was evaporating quickly. Industry contacts told me that Tristan was in over his head, making decisions that ranged from ineffective to actively harmful. He'd apparently tried to win back the lost accounts by offering steep discounts that would have made the contracts unprofitable even if the clients had accepted, which they hadn't. Chandler called me exactly once more, about 6 weeks after I'd left. I was in a good enough place professionally that I took the call. "Tessa," he started, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "I think I made a mistake." "Several, probably," I said neutrally. "I should never have let you go. I should have valued what you brought to Momentum. I see that now. Is there any scenario where you'd consider coming back? Name your terms, salary, title, equity, whatever you want." I'd imagined this conversation in various forms, and I'd thought I'd feel triumphant or vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. "Chandler, I appreciate the offer, but no, I'm building something at Summit that I'm genuinely excited about. More than that, I don't think we could work together anymore. You showed me clearly that your judgment is compromised when it comes to family loyalty versus business needs. That's not something that changes. What about just consulting?" he pressed. "Help us stabilize, develop a transition plan, something. I'll pay you whatever rate you want." "I can't, Chandler. I have a non-compete clause with Summit now, and even if I didn't, it wouldn't be appropriate. You need to figure this out with your team." "My team?" he laughed bitterly. "Half my senior people have left since you did. Diane gave notice last week. Monica is interviewing at other companies. The people who stayed are the ones who don't have options, and they're just waiting for the ship to sink so they can collect unemployment. Tristan has no idea what he's doing, and I can't fire him without destroying my relationship with my daughter. I'm trapped, Tessa." I felt a flicker of sympathy, not enough to help him, but enough to be honest. "You're not trapped, Chandler. You have choices. You could move Tristan to a role that matches his actual skill level and hire a real COO. You could sell the company to someone who can fix it. You could bring in a turnaround consultant. What you can't do is expect me to rescue you again after you made it clear that my contributions weren't valued." "I did value them," he said quietly. "I just didn't show it. And I let my ego get caught up in wanting Tristan to be successful." "That's probably the most honest thing you've said to me in a year," I replied. "I genuinely hope you figure it out, Chandler. Not for your sake, but for all the employees who are just trying to do their jobs. But I can't be part of that solution." After we hung up, I sat thinking about the full arc of what had happened. A year ago, I'd been grinding myself into dust to save a company that was failing because of its CEO's poor judgment. I'd succeeded, pulling off a recovery that should have been impossible. And I'd been rewarded by being replaced with someone whose only qualification was marrying the right person. Now, 6 months later, I was thriving at a company that valued competence. I'd brought a major client with me because they trusted my expertise, and Momentum was back in crisis. The temptation to feel victorious was strong, but what I actually felt was more complicated. I was angry at how I'd been treated, certainly. I was satisfied that my worth had been proven. Clients had literally left Momentum because I did, which was the ultimate validation of my value. But I also felt sad about what could have been. If Chandler had just valued merit over nepotism, if he'd given Tristan a role suited to his actual abilities, instead of pushing him into positions he wasn't ready for, Momentum could have continued thriving. All those employees could have kept their jobs. The recovery I'd worked so hard to achieve could have been the foundation for sustainable growth. Instead, Chandler's ego and poor judgment had created a completely avoidable crisis. And this time, I wasn't available to fix it. Over the following months, I heard occasional updates about Momentum through industry channels. They'd brought in a crisis management consultant who'd recommended selling the company. Chandler was apparently resistant, still hoping he could somehow turn things around. Tristan had been quietly moved to a special projects role, which everyone understood meant he'd been pushed aside but couldn't be fired. The company had downsized significantly, letting go of about 30% of their workforce. Meanwhile, Summit Logistics continued to grow. The Harrington account was performing beautifully, exceeding all their metrics. 2 other major clients that I'd pursued signed with us. Amanda promoted me to Chief Strategy Officer after just 6 months, recognizing both my results and my leadership in building out our enterprise accounts division. I was recruiting top talent from across the industry, several of whom were former Momentum employees who'd reached out after I left. One evening, about 8 months after I'd left Momentum, I ran into Diane at an industry networking event. We hugged warmly. She'd been one of the few genuine friends I'd had at Momentum. "You look great," she said. "Summit clearly agrees with you." "I'm in a good place," I confirmed. "What about you? I heard you left Momentum. Where did you land?" "I'm at Horizon Financial now, doing CFO work for a portfolio of mid-sized companies," she said. "It's good. Better work-life balance, interesting challenges, but Tessa, you should know what's happening at Momentum. Chandler is in final negotiations to sell the company to Apex Holdings. It's basically a liquidation. They're buying it for the client list and some of the operational assets, but most of the staff will be let go. The Momentum brand is probably going to disappear." I absorbed this news with mixed feelings. "How's Chandler handling it?" Diane shook her head. "Not well. He's acting like this is some kind of market inevitability, but everyone knows the truth. You saved that company, and he threw it away by replacing you with Tristan. Everything that's happened since has been a direct consequence of that decision. The clients you brought in left. The institutional knowledge walked out the door. The remaining staff had no confidence in leadership. It was a death spiral." "What about Tristan?" I asked, more out of curiosity than concern. "Last I heard, he's going to work for his father's real estate company. Apparently, he's decided logistics wasn't a good cultural fit for him." Diane's tone made clear what she thought of that explanation. The guy was in over his head from day one, but Chandler's ego wouldn't let him admit it until it was way too late. We talked for a while longer, catching up on industry news and mutual contacts. Before we parted, Diane said something that stuck with me. "You know what the real lesson is from all this? Companies don't fail because of market conditions or bad luck. They fail because of bad leadership decisions." Chandler had everything he needed to succeed: a recovered business, strong client relationships, talented staff, and you literally handing him a roadmap for growth. He threw it all away because he couldn't separate his family ego from business judgment. That's on him. She was right. I'd spent months wondering if there was something I could have done differently, some way I could have navigated the situation to avoid this outcome. But the truth was that once Chandler decided that advancing Tristan was more important than sound business decisions, there was no path forward for me at Momentum. Staying in that advisory role would have meant watching everything I'd built be dismantled by incompetence while being powerless to stop it. Leaving was the only move that preserved my sanity and my career. The final chapter of the Momentum story came about a year after I'd left. The sale to Apex Holdings was finalized, and as Diane had predicted, most of the staff was let go. Chandler walked away with enough money to retire comfortably, certainly more than he deserved given that he was essentially selling the scraps of a company he'd destroyed. The Momentum name was retired, with the viable parts of the business absorbed into Apex's existing operations. I heard through former colleagues that Chandler tried to position the sale as a strategic success, a planned exit that maximized shareholder value. No one in the industry bought it. Everyone knew that Momentum had been on a growth trajectory after the recovery I'd engineered, and that the collapse was entirely due to Chandler replacing me with his incompetent son-in-law. It became something of a cautionary tale in industry circles, a perfect example of how nepotism and ego can destroy a thriving business. As for me, I continued to build my career at Summit Logistics. 3 years after joining the company, Amanda promoted me to President and Chief Operating Officer, with a clear path to eventually becoming CEO when she decided to retire. I'd built the Strategic Accounts Division into Summit's most profitable unit, managing over $200 million in annual client revenue. The team I'd recruited and developed was consistently recognized as one of the best in the industry. More importantly, I'd learned crucial lessons about knowing my worth and choosing the right environment. I could have stayed at Momentum in that advisory role, telling myself that at least I still had a job, that maybe I could slowly rebuild influence. But that would have meant accepting that my value was negotiable, that loyalty and results could be trumped by politics and nepotism. Walking away from that situation with no guarantee of what came next, was one of the best decisions I ever made. The professional world loves to talk about loyalty, about being a team player, about putting the company first. But loyalty is a two-way street. Companies that demand commitment from employees while treating them as disposable don't deserve that loyalty. I gave Momentum 12 years of dedicated work and a successful recovery that should have been impossible. When Chandler decided that his son-in-law's advancement mattered more than my proven expertise, he broke that loyalty contract. At that point, I owed him and Momentum nothing. When Harrington Industries canceled their contract an hour after I left, it wasn't because I sabotaged Momentum. I didn't badmouth the company, didn't actively poach clients, didn't violate any professional ethics. What happened was simply the natural consequence of Chandler's decision. Roger and his team at Harrington had partnered with me, not with Momentum as an abstract entity. When I was no longer there, they had no reason to stay with a company that had shown such poor judgment. That's the part that executives like Chandler never seem to understand. They think client relationships belong to the company, that they're assets that can be managed by anyone. But in reality, those relationships are built on trust between individuals. They're maintained through personal credibility, proven competence, and genuine understanding of client needs. You can't just plug someone else into that relationship and expect it to work the same way, especially when that someone is obviously unqualified. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever been undervalued at work, passed over for someone less qualified, or wondered if loyalty to a company that doesn't appreciate you is worth it, I hope you'll subscribe to the Payback Office channel. We're building a community of people who believe that merit should matter, that hard work deserves recognition, and that sometimes walking away is the most powerful move you can make. We're working together toward reaching 6,000 subscribers, and I'd be honored to have you as part of this journey. The ending of my story isn't about revenge. It's about value being recognized. When Momentum collapsed after I left, it wasn't because I destroyed it. It was because I had been the one holding it together, and Chandler hadn't realized that until it was too late. The clients didn't leave to spite anyone. They left because the expertise and reliability they'd been paying for was no longer available. The talented employees didn't quit to punish Chandler. They quit because they saw the writing on the wall and didn't want to go down with a sinking ship. Sometimes the best payback isn't elaborate revenge or public vindication. Sometimes it's simply succeeding somewhere else while the people who undervalued you face the natural consequences of their poor decisions. Chandler gave my job to his incompetent son-in-law, and I responded by building an even better career at a company that actually appreciated my skills. Momentum collapsed not because I sabotaged it, but because Chandler destroyed what I had built by prioritizing nepotism over competence. And honestly, that's better than any revenge I could have planned. If you found value in this story, if it reminded you to know your worth and choose environments that respect it, I'd appreciate your support through subscribing. Thanks for being here, and remember, your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see it. Sometimes the best thing you can do is take that value somewhere it will be appreciated.